Alright, hey guys, let's get this stream started again. This is my last session on the stream, so I'm just going to be working into this painting that we kind of started last week from the render. I did a little bit of extra work into this after the stream last week because I just had a couple of ideas I wanted to try out, so kind of throwing this weird alien into the middle here. And I think there's a few things I want to kind of fix about this painting as it sits at the moment, just in terms of the values and the focus. I think I want to kind of have this alien blasting these planets apart, because I think that's the main thing that kind of bothered me last week about the image, was that I wasn't really sure what the focus of it was, and I think that kind of hurt it a little bit. So we're going to just work on kind of resetting all that and see where we get to in a couple of hours. But yeah, so it's mostly just where the this area behind the tentacles, I kind of initially kept it pretty flat because you know, like, space doesn't have atmosphere, but I think at the end of the day I want to just add a little bit more, even if it is like not particularly realistic, just add a little bit more kind of glow to those areas just to make it a little bit more readable. Might throw some stars in there as well. And yeah, and then I think, as much as I don't mind the robot, I think I kind of want to find a better pose for him, so I'm going to turn him off for now, and then we'll just have a crack at just painting him out in a slightly more interesting way in just a little bit. But yeah, it's going to be basically just Photoshop today, so if you have any questions about Photoshop as a tool or anything that I'm doing, just feel free to ask away. I think we might move this planet around a little bit. Ooh, I see. So he was kind of in a bit of a weird spot there, that planet, so we'll just move him back there. Some of these tentacles kind of reaching in here. Figure out where all my layers are. Move that over there for now. So yeah, just making sure that everything kind of value-wise sits nicely in this painting. Nothing is like kind of out of place. it's a really kind of important step, which I think I skipped a little bit last week. I was painting into the render, mostly because I was probably trying to think of things to say. Talking and painting at the same time is pretty difficult. Oh, that's an eraser, I see. And yeah, Ray's here again this week, I should mention, just moderating the chat, and she's probably going to jump in and ask a few questions as well, just to make sure that I don't just sit here in complete silence by myself for 2 hours. Just tweaking where some of these like asteroids are, because again in space, you know, where you've got a little bit more limited atmosphere, so you don't have as much of that to kind of show depth. Those types of overlaps can be really important, just kind of controlling where they need to go. just trying to get a bit of the material property of these tentacles to kind of read nicely. I want it to look, you know, a little bit glossy. Definitely want the kind of, I guess, like the suction cups, right, to kind of read on the surface, because that gives it a really nice kind of silhouette break. It's a little meteor, but I think we'll get rid of that because it's a bit confusing. And this brush that I'm using is kind of like my favorite fallback brush. It's kind of, it's good at everything. You can use it really big. I don't even know where it's from. I just find it in, it seems to be in every single brush pack that I've ever grabbed off the internet. I think it's based on one of the default Photoshop brushes, but it's just this guy. I just recognize it by the shape. Kind of like see that, and that thumbnail down there is kind of, I just kind of like instantly see that whenever it's in a brush palette, and this is definitely one that I always keep at the top of my brush collection as well, because it is just so good for basically everything. You can use it in a bunch of different ways and get really kind of like nice painterly strokes, so you can use it a little bit harder and actually use it to form lines. It's not amazing for like really soft stuff, but you can get for the kind of the way that I like to paint. It's pretty reliable at all times. Did I watch The Mitchells versus the Machines? I did. That was a cool movie. I like that one a lot. Was doing, you know, it was a just as a movie, it was just good. But kind of like a lot of the technical stuff that was in there, I was watching a little bit of the behind the scenes stuff yesterday, and just kind of looking at what they were doing with stylizing the image and all that kind of stuff, I thought was really interesting. And so yeah, it's like, it's super cool to see that kind of animation really having its time in the sun as well, because that's the kind of stuff that I really enjoy watching, and it's also the kind of stuff that would be, you know, like would be great to work on as well. You know, I've worked on a couple of TV shows in the same vein as that, but like the more that stuff is successful, the more of it gets made, which is good for us as artists, good for the industry. Yeah, no, it was really cool. Not Still doesn't quite usurp Spider-Verse as my favorite animated film, but that's pretty hard. That's a very hard bar to exceed. But yeah, it was really cool. Liked it a lot. I especially like the bit at the end where I don't want to spoil anything, but like the mum goes nuts. I wonder if we could put like I'll go for that for now. Do like a little bit of a gag in the background here with another tentacle kind of coming out of presumably the same creature, but like coming out of the background. And I think ultimately the thing from last week, the thing that kind of I did, which I wish I hadn't have done, is I did get a little bit, I guess, like carried away with trying to get the image to like a decent level of finish before I really kind of knew what I wanted to do with the painting. And that is that's something that you want to avoid as much as possible. You really want to know what the image you're painting is trying to achieve. And for me, like, the story of the painting is the story of what's happening in the painting is the most important thing. Kind of know you don't want to just be working without a particular narrative goal, but that is something that I was definitely a little bit guilty of last week. So this week trying to rectify that, and that gives me something to work towards in having this weird space squid thing, whatever the heck it is. Definitely don't know what that is, but kind of like having it sneaking up on our protagonist here, which is the robot and the ship. Obviously the robot isn't there at the moment, but we will get that back in. Move that up a bit, just open up that corner a bit. I thought I was getting something nice with that overlap there, but I think in the end it was just making the whole thing feel a little bit claustrophobic. And I think we'll copy that just as a starting point down to here. This particular planet can be kind of like the focal point in the sense that it's the next one on the chopping block for this giant creature to just rip through and do, like, extract minerals or whatever the heck this thing's doing. We'll just throw a little bit of extra light on that one as well, just to really make it obvious that it is the target here. A little bit of cast shadow coming down from kind of like this other tentacle here. Check that the composition's not unbalanced in any way. Just flip that canvas around. Think about what this robot could be, how he's going to be standing in the foreground here. The angle does make it it's a little bit, I think it's a little bit of an optical illusion with just like making this pose seem a little bit awkward occasionally. I just realized my music had stopped and I don't know how to get it back on because it's doing some weird technical stuff through the stream which I did not set up, but that's alright. To remind myself what this robot actually looks like. This unfinished version of him. that's a slightly more successful pose there. I like it more than what I had. Not necessarily 100% a winner, but I don't hate it, so that's a good start. So just taking the lines that I had there and just clipping them down onto the same layer, and then flattening that out. Just keep it pretty, just keep the layers a bit more simple. What is the color scheme of this painting influenced by or inspired by? It's a good question. I honestly like blue. Blue is kind of like my go-to color. I think like, I mean, space as well, right? Like blue, black, that kind of thing. But yeah, I don't know. Like the blue and pink are like two colors that they work really nicely together. They're fun. You know, this is definitely a painting that I don't want anyone to take too seriously either, so definitely looking to do something a little bit whimsical. But yeah, other than that, like I didn't necessarily set out to specifically do something these colors, but it is. I know, you know, I'd be lying if I didn't say that this was not a color palette that I'm not relatively comfortable kind of working in, so which for doing something on a stream is definitely a consideration. For me anyway. But yeah, no, I don't know. I just like these kind of colors. I like doing colorful stuff too. Like I think it's more fun. So one of the things that I was talking to Alex about, Alex Colvin, who is the designer of this robot, was that he thought him having like a mug or something like that, like a cup of tea, would be probably the correct kind of mood. So I'm happy to oblige that. As much, you know, as much as we can get that kind of detail down. This is one of those times where you really want to, you know, you do want to avoid zooming into an image too much to get infinite amounts of detail in, because it's simply not going to be viewed from that close, so we don't need to go crazy with it. I'm kind of having to hold myself back a little bit on this. And yeah, in terms of color, I think it's really important to kind of take that stuff into consideration. As to how it can kind of help push a piece to kind of like, tell a certain story or feel a certain way. And like I said, I personally really like doing stuff that has a little bit of fun in it, is a little bit, weird and quirky. So, that I find myself kind of more comfortable when I'm using lots of color as opposed to not much. Really kind of muted stuff is not, I find that like much more difficult to paint than I do colorful stuff. Just a little bit more kind of painted detail on the surface of this planet here, just to bring it more so into like style with the rest of the painting. I think like just a few areas in here that still seem a little bit too synthetic for me, so just wanting to break them up a bit, a few more cracks kind of off into the surface here. And I can probably push the brightness and the saturation just a little bit here around a little bit too much, but just around the character. I was going back to revisit this tentacle and just push the values up a little bit there. Just dropping down a touch too much. Knock that back a bit. And I feel like there's maybe room for like one other tentacle to like push through the middle here. Use the warp tool here to just find maybe a slightly nicer shape. I always find this is a really good tool for when you can often find little shapes and stuff that you wouldn't necessarily hit naturally with your hand, or you can like rescue something that you maybe painted a little bit off, but like sometimes you'll paint something and it has a nice feeling about it, but there's something just a little bit off, and you know that if you try and repaint it, you might lose that some of the good stuff, trying to catch whatever little bit you missed out first time. So warp tool is really great for that, just kind of like tweaking things around. Mucking around with the flow control on this brush is one of the things that makes it really versatile. Because yeah, if you need those really kind of like harsh lines, you can turn the flow up and it will give you that, and if you need something a little bit more painterly, you can turn the flow down and it becomes a little bit more controllable. is there, what's this question, is there an end result of the painting that I have in mind? Well, I mean, I want it to be not terrible. That's kind of my current aim for the stream. I think I just want to make it like, I want to make sure that the depth reads all right, because that's something that not that I've done massive amounts of paintings of things in outer space, but when I have, like, that's always been the thing that I've struggled with. So that's a little bit of the challenge for me. I want the whole thing to feel fairly cohesive in terms of the forms and in terms of like treatment of paint. I would just I think this is, yeah, there's like, I mean, ultimately I just want anyone who looks at this to kind of like enjoy it and think that it's, you know, a fun little idea with a weird little cool robot. You know, like that's really it for this. I think, because I'm just, you know, really in one sense doing this painting for my own, it's my own enjoyment, right? This is not for a client or for a job or anything like that. So I'm allowed, you know, I'm allowed to be selfish with that and go like, well, I can get whatever I want out of this painting. So yeah, it's not anything too strict, but this is also like probably well, at least 6 weeks ago. Oh, sorry, 3 weeks ago, 6 hours ago when this started. This was probably like the first kind of painting like this that I'd done in quite a long time. So definitely looking to just kind of like blow off some of the cobwebs when it comes to painting, because a lot of my professional work in the last year or so has been very different to this in terms of style and story, and just like, you know, how I'm going about making images and stuff like that. So this is a little bit of the painting side of this, at least, was a little bit of a kickback to something that I used to be able to do a little bit more regularly. I get less time to do this kind of stuff these days with the kind of work that I'm doing. So just looking to really enjoy the painting process, probably more so than anything. Let's see if we can use content aware fill to paint the rest of that asteroid for us. Awesome, perfect. Who even needs to use a paintbrush anymore? Just get the computer to do everything for us. Painting on the wrong layer. flip this again and see if anything jumps out at me. Just the brightness of that little section of tentacle there was kind of bugging me a bit. One other thing that I might just try this as a really just as a very quick test. I don't think it's going to really work, but I'm just wondering if we could maybe paint in a little bit more of like a explosion coming out of this particular planet. Sort my layers out here, they're a little bit wacky. And because the think of this is really just a what if. It might work, but just kind of thinking we might be able to get like a little bit of this extra, this kind of red light kind of working into some of the reflections here. Just be a bit of fun, really. The flow of this brush right down so it's really kind of allowing me to very softly kind of get paint down. use a smudge brush here just to soften the explosion a little bit. Kind of almost like a motion blur more than anything. And then also just in the background might also just kind of suggest like another explosion. Where can we put it? Maybe back here somewhere. Maybe give a bit more of the sense of this creature kind of like really running amok in this section of the galaxy asteroid belt. Just finding the right tone for this in the background. It's pretty close. Right, value, just make sure it doesn't step out too much, look weird. That low, don't need it. Oh dang, I completely put the wrong layer. Whoops. That's you. Could be that one, right? Yeah, okay. Cool, I guess we'll just combine those two layers. Just gonna eat back into this with the eraser a little bit, try and find some nice shapes in the explosions, and I think it's really, especially even though we're kind of adding a few little new things to this painting at the moment, like it's very important when you're even doing something as relatively abstract as an explosion that you do really kind of like take the time to make sure that the shapes you're creating are nice and attractive. Even like something like clouds or something like that, you want to make sure that there's just nice kind of like shape relationships within everything. You don't have things repeating too much. None of the shapes are like stealing too much attention away because they're too different from everything else. Just making sure everything's just kind of nicely considered. Get another one in here. Yeah, I guess like almost just saying like everywhere that these like tentacles are kind of like touching a surface, they kind of leave some destruction in their wake. I think I might come back and revisit the first explosion. I'm not really happy with the shapes in there. These later ones feel a lot more kind of kinetic and have way more energy in them. Yeah, let's kind of like smash this one back a bit. Work back into it from the ground up. Definitely like the more saturated colors in this one, given that it's, you know, way closer to camera. But I just feel like the shapes were not as effective. Just get a linear dodge layer on here as well, and just use that just to push up some of the intensity of that. And some of the other ones as well while we're at it. Just a bit of a gradient through there. It's not that you want to lean on this type of kind of effects at the end, but you know, and it can sometimes make a painting look a little bit overly digital, I guess, but it, you know, can be a really nice little touch at the end of a painting to just bring some of these types of blending layers in to give that nice kind of softer effect that you get. It's very cinematic. And this can be one of those things you use to really control the depth. So why this robot is here having a cup of tea in the middle of all this, I have absolutely no idea. But that's not important. What I'm actually going to do for the robot here is just take some of the, I guess, the effect of that explosion, right, and use that as some justification to really kind of punch up his the highlights. And maybe we can like make some stars or something in here. I'm just gonna make a new canvas here, and I'm not sure if there's any like, see if we've got any kind of like starry brushes in here. Oh, this will probably actually work. Foreground dust. No, that's a little bit too dust-like, strangely enough. Dots. Cool. This will do it. Yeah, this is just a random brush like that. Let's just copy that. Send that to the back, and then we'll just probably actually a little bit too it works, but we need something a little bit small. Actually, what we might do is just gonna see if I can find on the web. This is a very like fringe case scenario here, but there's a bunch of free to use photos taken by the Hubble telescope and all the other NASA satellites that are out there, which are completely, they're like 100% Creative Commons, or at least they always used to be. I'm going to assume they still are. And a lot of them are like pretty amazing. So see if we can find one that's not too ridiculous. Obviously these are not all photos, some of these are like artist recreations and stuff like that, but a lot of them are, some of them are quite noisy, but some of these are actually like really, really high res. Because they're kind of stitched together from a bunch of photos compiled on top of each other. So I'm just going to grab this one here. And even though this is not like stars, it should give us just a nice backdrop of something we can use. Let's see. So that's not too bad. Might just double that layer up on itself a couple of times just to get it a bit brighter. There's a few, I'm just going to erase some of the really big stars that look a little bit out of place. I'm just going to run a sharp and an unsharp mask on that as well, because that will just pop the stars out a little bit more. Then we can knock the opacity. It all seems a little bit counterproductive, but and then knock the opacity back a little bit more as well. And then I just want to add a little bit more painting on some of these tentacles in the middle. We've got about half an hour left, and we're just going to spend that time just, you know, tweaking, finessing, finalizing a few things here and there. I'm going to turn this glowy layer off for a second. Cool. Yeah, and just with some of these tentacles that are kind of in the middle of the view, just sharpening up the edges a little bit more, which in some cases just means erasing some of the slightly funkier stuff that's going on. Sometimes it means adding a little bit more paint in order to get that effect. But also I think it's very important to make sure that at this stage you don't overpaint things as well, because that's really easy to do. Making things too polished, and you really end up making and missing out on everything that makes, you know, a successful painting and an interesting painting. If you're doing it for a particular type of style of work, like you don't necessarily need it to be, you know, like photographic in its detail. It can just be a little bit less kind of crazy on details, but it'll still read really nicely. Let's try to find a good place to put these asteroids. That'll do. Just need to work into this guy a little bit more. The reality is with any painting really is like you can spend as long as you want putting detail into it, and often with, you know, a personal piece you might spend a little bit longer than you necessarily have to adding details and stuff like that, because you want to get it to a certain point. Whereas if you're working on something for a client, like it's done when the client says it's done, or when your deadline's up. Time is the ultimate factor in that. And I've personally found that because I like to, with personal pieces, sometimes put, is that all one layer? Not quite. Put a bit too much into them sometimes. Yeah, just have to be careful. Whoops. Oh my gosh, how many different layers do I have here? Dang it. That's annoying. Just smudge that out. Like that, and we'll come back in here and just repaint that little bit on the right layer. And that's like one of the bits there that I'm kind of talking about, just being a shape that's not like super attractive. This curve, you kind of want to see it go over in one nice swoop, and it kind of flat spots there a little bit. So I wouldn't worry about that if it wasn't right in the middle of the piece, but because it is, that's one of those last little 5% changes that you might want to make. And the read of this tentacle against everything behind it is a little bit funky. I'm not even sure I've tried to put the edge of that tentacle. There's actually way too much in there. Got a kind of glowy bits in here too. Might just turn that down a touch. And in here, and these two layers plus that one we'll just make into one layer, and I'm going to give that a bit of an unsharp mask as well, which will just help push that into the foreground a bit. I'm going to put a little bit of film grain over the top of this as well, just to that. Try that again. Nice. It's like a really old layer from right back at the start. I wonder if we can just kind of throw that. Under here for just a little bit of something different. And this planet in here is just, oops, eraser. Just needs a little bit more secondary light on it, really, just to push, even if it might be a little bit fake, actually, just something to push the form a bit. It's becoming a bit too much of a blob. Just get rid of that box because we never really used it. I don't think we really need it. Now I'm just kind of sitting here and looking at things and just waiting to see if anything kind of pops out at me. As being anything that I want to tweak or fix. I'm sure I'll open this up tomorrow and look at it, and there'll be a bunch of stuff in there that I want to change. But just gonna also check my it's a bit late to do this in a sense, but I'm just gonna make sure that my value ranges are all looking okay, that there's nothing that's like unreadable in there. That kind of looks pretty alright to me. Which is good. So I think like just as a little final thing that I tend to do in here is just do a copy merged and bring everything, just copy it as one layer to the top and duplicate that. Do just a general overall sharpen on everything, and then on that layer, a mask. We'll invert that mask, and then so that what I've basically done there is just sharpened everything, and then immediately turned what I just did off. And then if we come on the mask with a white soft round brush here, or any brush we want really, we can just sharpen up ever so slightly the bits of the image that are important or kind of need that little extra effect in them. Just helps create a little bit of variation in the image there. Do another copy merge to kind of take the result of that. I always like to just run it through like the auto tone, contrast, and color in Photoshop, because sometimes you get something that maybe just reads a little bit nicer. Often it's not a huge difference, so it's usually not super worth it. I'm going to take the auto tone adjustment because it's a little bit more neutral. And then over the top of that, again, like sometimes just, I don't think we really need it in this case, but I'll just show you where it is, just in case you want to muck around with it. But like color range and selective color are two really quick ways to just kind of grade things. And I think the palette in this is working pretty well, so we don't really need to muck around with it too much, but it can just let you get a little bit of extra color into your shadows or something, which can sometimes homogenize an image, just bring it all together so it's a little bit more like playing nicely with everything. Like I said, the difference between here is pretty small. It's just kind of brightening and giving everything a little bit more of a red cast. You know, we could also do a color balance in here, but I don't think we really need it for this image. And then the final thing that, it really depends on what you're doing this for, but if I'm ever doing anything for like a film concept or something like that, I always like to put just a little bit of film grain over the top, because it just makes things seem a little bit more cinematic. So what I tend to do is just get a soft light layer filled with 50% gray, and then filter, add noise. Just turn it up way more than you need. I just make it a little bit bigger like that because that just softens the noise slightly, because it has to resample. And then you can just play with the opacity of this layer. Just bring the noise up to a good level. Usually somewhere around 25% is usually pretty good, because you don't want it to be overpowering to the image. You just want it to kind of sit on top of the image and just, again, it's one of those things that just kind of pulls everything back together a little bit more. And then I guess like the final thing to do is to put a tiny little signature in the bottom right. There we go. So, yeah. So that's pretty much it. I think I'm kind of done as much on that painting as I think I'm gonna get done today, and as much as I want to do today. I should probably save this. Haven't done that yet. And cool, that's saved, so we're safe. Yeah, hopefully you guys have enjoyed and hopefully learned something from it if that's what you were looking for. And just seeing my process kind of from sketching through Blender, making up some of this stuff, setting this scene up in Blender, and then jumping back into Photoshop to kind of turn it, into a painting. Yeah, I mean, if anyone's got any little last minute questions, I'm happy to field those till we get up to about 4 p.m. And then we'll call it, I think. But yeah, I've had a lot of fun, so I hope you guys have enjoyed it as well. Not sure who's coming up next week. It's going to be someone else, but you can check out the socials and all that kind of stuff if you want to find out who that is going to be. It's probably going to be a slightly different workflow to me. Might be some 3D stuff, potentially, maybe some sculpting. I'm not sure, but yeah, I reckon we'll probably leave it there for today. And yeah, if anyone's interested as well, I'm sure we can probably organize to probably like chuck the working files or something from all of this stuff up into a folder somewhere. So if you guys are curious to just kind of get your hands on the files and see how I've put them together and all that kind of stuff, you are more than welcome to. So yeah. Alright guys, well, I'm gonna call it there, and thanks for having me, and you guys can check out the stream next week for a new mystery guest. Alright, see you later.